So hello, everyone. Did that go? Thank you for being here today. Like there's a little delay. My name is Kathy Gilmore, and I'm the president of the Valley Industrial Association. We're really excited to have this opportunity to be in this beautiful space. Thank you, Jimmy Allen, and your team at Bureau Gravity. I am excited about the program today. We have two wonderful speakers that are going to get you in the know on everything trade and tariff. And I'm going to let Brad Edwards, 40-time Emmy Award-winning news reporter, formerly from CBS, kick us off today. And so one quick thank you. Cushman and Wakefield, Mike Magliano should be joining us shortly, but we're so grateful to his sponsoring of our executive forum. And then, of course, our wonderful host sponsor, Bureau Gravity. So I'll let you take it away, Brad.
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, everybody. That's a warm welcome. Yeah, all right. Wow, what a warm group. So I was like, how do you warm up this crowd? And I Googled one of my little chat bot, and I was like, tell me a tariff joke. And my computer shut down. So apparently there are no jokes about tariffs, right? If anyone has one, let me know. But what a crazy economic time we're in, right? We just don't know. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of this might happen, but we don't really know what's going to happen. We know one thing, though, and it's going to directly affect you guys. And it's going to affect your people. It's going to affect your employees. It's going to affect all of us. Jimmy, you want me to cut this mic? Yeah, we're live across the world right now on YouTube. So one thing we focus on here, Bureau Gravity, is this little oasis we have in Aurora. And there's very few things we know about the economy right now. But I think we do know we're at the height of the attention economy. Attention economy. And the greatest price you can pay is being anonymous right now. If you're anonymous, you're losing the game. If in the scroll economy, you're not doing something people are stopping to see, you're in trouble. Now, luckily, I was a news anchor for 20 years because rarely could anyone talk through their own echo for this many minutes and pay attention. But I can do it because that little earpiece I used to have, it's called mix minus. If it wouldn't happen, I would just have to act like everything was fine. So I'm going to drop this for a minute. So we appreciate you guys coming out here. Does anyone know what HTS is while we talk about tariffs? HTS. It's harmonized tariff. Whoa! Holy cow! We got a gummy for this guy? A gummy bear, not like that kind of gummy. Yes, that's exactly what it is. That is, like, you're going to have to get used to this nomenclature. This is a whole new world. If you don't know what that is, that's the 10-digit code on an item that would be tariffed. Can you say that as a verb? Can you make tariff a verb? We can do anything. Well, we can do anything. Okay. So I learned that from my friend here, Alejandro Rodriguez. Alejandro, why don't you come up here for a second? Come on in. So this guy, an engineer by trade, he basically works in some way, shape, or form with probably the biggest corporations in the world. He works with probably a tier below them, right? The guys that work with the big guys. And he's here to help explain it to us. We had a really enlightening brief conversation before I came up here. We met for just a couple minutes, and I was like, can you kind of tell me what's going on? Like, through my little dumb Dr. Seuss brain, can you make me understand? You know, my simple question is, are tariffs good or bad, right? Isn't that what we want to know? We need something black or white. And he kind of has this brilliant little concept to me is there's the romance of a tariff, like, hey, make everything here. Everything's great. We'll be one. And then there's a reality. The romance and the reality. And with that, why don't you take it away? Can you kick us off with that, Alejandro? First of all, Monterrey, Mexico in the house. So
Thank you, Brian. I don't need a mic, right? Can you hear me okay? Yes. So, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. My name is Alejandro Rodriguez. I'm going to try and do 2 things today. So when you leave today, I hope you're able to understand, first of all, what a tariff is, what it's not. Also, get you an understanding about what's going on. I'm sure you get a lot of information in the news, newsletters, emails about everything that's happening. I'm going to try and cut to the water and give you just what's out there, what's already implemented, what has been mentioned, what's coming, and potentially that's going to help you better understand the things that you're going to have to do or need to do to run your business better. I'm going to go back and forth here very quickly. I think this slides. I hope these are the right presentation. Very quickly about Panorama. If you don't know us, again, we're a professional service firm. We're among the largest professional service firms in the U.S. We were founded in 1924, so last year was a 100-year anniversary. We provide traditional tax, audit, and consulting services. We have 20 offices in the U.S., and then we have 4 global offices. The first one we opened internationally was Shanghai, China in 2004. Then we opened Mexico in 2008. 2009, we opened Mumbai, India. And right before COVID in 2019, we opened Tokyo, Japan. Many of the consulting services that we offer are targeting manufacturing companies. What I do personally on a day-to-day is support companies that are doing cross-border business. So these are companies, either US companies doing business in Canada or in Mexico, Japanese companies doing business here in the US or in Brazil, Chinese companies doing business in Mexico. We have a lot of that now. So, and my perspective and my comments are going to come from a business perspective. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a customs broker. Maybe you're going to have to eventually engage in those type of services to try and find solutions to the challenges that you're going to be facing. But I'm not. I'm a business consultant. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I've been doing consulting for 25 years, and I actually ran a manufacturing operation as well back in Mexico. So that's my perspective, where my perspective is going to be coming from. Brad did a great job. I don't know if all these slides are. Kathy, when we look at, I don't think especially the ones that talk about the deficit. I'm sorry about this. And by the way, I do want to make this interactive. I think we're a small audience, so if you have questions along the way, or have something that's bothering you and you see something on any of the screens or something I mentioned that you want to either discuss further or dive deeper into, please do let me know. But at the end of the day, let's just start by saying, what is the current trade and tariff environment globally? We're seeing countries being more protectionist. We're seeing developing economies growing, mainly as a result of some of the shifts we're seeing from the manufacturing perspective. And when I say this, it's countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia. Central America has also countries that are growing. Costa Rica, Colombia, even South America and Chile, there's countries that are growing. And why are they growing? They're growing as a result of many of the shifts from that 2008 programs. In 2008, on his first administration, President Trump imposed tariffs into a very large portion of the Chinese goods that were going to the US. As a result of that, many companies decided to change some of their strategies for either manufacturing or supply chain. So a lot of companies moved production or sourcing from China into Thailand, into Vietnam, Mexico, Costa Rica, some to the US, some to Canada as well. So that is the reason that there's been a shift in how some of these countries and economies have been growing.
Alejandro, so we have, I don't know if this is a worldwide saying, but we have a saying here that no question is a dumb question. Which I think is a lie. But in this topic, like everyone here should feel completely open to asking any question because so much is unknown. Like there actually is no bad question because you're not really going to give a definite answer, right? You're just going to say, this is what we're seeing in the marketplace. Right, Alejandro?
That is absolutely correct. As I mentioned before, again, increased protectionism, there's been fragmentation in trade relationships. Obviously, we're seeing a few now between the US and some of its allies, Mexico, Canada included, obviously China as well. There's geopolitical tensions, not only here in North America. There's a lot going on in the Middle East as well. There's still the conflict with Ukraine and Russia. So there's a lot happening, which is creating a lot of issues from a global trade perspective. So when you hear about deficit, you hear a lot about it. What does it mean? Essentially, deficit means you're buying more from outside than you're actually exporting. Ideally, in a very romantic world, like Brad mentioned, those would be whatever you buy, you sell, or could be even better that you export more than you actually import.
This is only related to goods, like services. Like if you're based in Mexico and you're here, you don't count towards the trade deficit. It's only goods.
It's only goods. This is only the U.S. So the U.S. in 2023 had a $1.06 trillion deficit.
Goods, not services.
And if you look, which are the most important trade partners from imports and exports? Mexico, China, and Canada. And on the other side on exports is Mexico, China, and Canada.
Do you have that same graph? If you take oil out, do you have that?
I could try and find it, maybe not, I don't have it with me. But we can try to find it. So before key elements, so what is a tariff? Many people think it's a tax. It is not a tax. It is like a tax, but it's not a tax. It's a duty. And that's something that needs to be very clear. So when you buy something from a vendor outside, you're not going to get an invoice that says cost of the good plus tariff total. The tariff is going to be included. I'm sorry, but it's not really here. And maybe do you want to collect mine?
We can. I was going to say, unless you want to just tell me what's left, I can find it for you.
Oh. The thing is, I just want to continue to tell the story, but so that's what a tariff is. There's, for me, 4 very important elements to understand to be able to determine the impact that a tariff is going to have on each of you. The first one is the HTS code, Harmonized Tariff Schedule. There's a few people that know what it is. This is a 10-digit code that any item that's traded globally is going to have. From a cow, to an orange, to a spring, bicycle, vehicle, anything. So having an understanding on the HTS code that you are using, it's going to be critical. We've had clients in the past, and we looked at this also when we switched from NAFTA to USMCA. We had clients that were using an HTS code for a bicycle when they were actually importing a piece of rubber. So it's something that you need to understand, because at the end of the day, tariffs are going to be implemented on a HTS code schedule. I'm sure you've heard, for example, and we'll talk about steel and aluminum, the HTS codes that were impacted has already been released by the White House. So you can look at what you're buying and then go look at what was announced, and you're going to know if a tariff was imposed or not. So having a good understanding of your HTS code is going to be critical. The second one is the customs value. When we say there's going to be a tariff of 25%, 25% of what? Of what's declared in customs. So if you, for example, do not have a good understanding of what you're buying and at what price, if you're including insurance, if you're including packaging, if you're including logistics costs or commissions, maybe there's opportunities there to try and make that number less, so the impact of the tariff is less. So
If the thing that you're selling is a combination of all of the packaging and the plastic bag and then the little, I make ribbons, and so I put them in little boxes
Yes.
and then they get sent away. Do I need to then do an HTS for each of the components
No.
of that? No, just the one thing?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's a great question. HTS codes, they're going to have an HTS codes for a component, and then, for example, if you assemble a piece of equipment, there's going to be a different HTS most likely for that bigger piece of equipment, okay?
Thank you.
And that is going to determine the tariff that you're going to be paying.
Okay.
For really understanding the actual customs value is going to be very important as well. Right now, for example, and to give you a few examples, we have clients in Canada that were essentially selling to companies in the US that distribute their goods. What they're trying to do now is that their end customer is saying the tariff is going to have a very big impact on them. Why? Because the distributor is paying a tariff on that value. So what this company is going to plan and do is they're going to set up a company in the US. They're going to do an intercompany transaction at a lower price, so the actual tariff that they're going to be paying is going to be less. Those are the type of strategies that you need to think about. Country of origin, I think this is the biggest one. So obviously, when President Trump announced the steel and aluminum tariffs, it said it's going to be 25% if they're coming from these countries. And that is the country of origin. A huge misconception. If I'm shipping something from Canada to the US, then it's a Canadian good. That's not true. It doesn't really matter where the product is being shipped from. It's where actually was manufactured or the country of origin of the good. There were a lot of companies that were trying, and we got a lot of Chinese companies reaching out to us. It's like, I want to set up a company in Mexico. I'm going to buy a warehouse. I'm going to ship everything to Mexico and then ship it to the US using USMCA and pay 0 tariff. And we said, you can certainly do that. But because nothing is done to the product when it comes to Mexico, when it moves to the US, it continues to be a Chinese product. It doesn't matter that it came to the port of LA or through Laredo. It doesn't matter. The product is Chinese, and it's going to pay 25%. Okay? There's strategies around changing the country of origin. And it doesn't mean that you just change the label. It's ensuring that you're adding enough content in a particular country to make it Canadian, US, Mexican. We're seeing a lot of companies right now. They were buying from China. There's a 25% tariff when they ship to the US. What are they doing now? They're shipping Chinese components to Thailand. They're making the assembly in Thailand. So now it's enough value add that is a good from Thailand. And right now there's no tariff from that perspective.
Is there a percentage that needs to be changed?
Great question. depends by country. Mexico, US, and Canada, because we have USMCA, this HTS code that I said it's very important, is going to tell us the amount or the percentage of what I call regional value content to be able to be classified as USMCA. In other countries, they call substantial transformation. This is where trade attorneys come in. They're going to let you know, and usually if you're going to do that, I recommend you get an opinion in writing from that attorney to say, yeah, there's substantial transformation. It's now labeled from Thailand, so it can come into the US without tariff. Okay? So very important, country of origin. And the other option is if you're only sourcing or buying products, you can just change the country of origin. If you were buying from China, if you're able to find something that's similar and at a good price here in the US, buy it in the US.
Who has the final determination of whether or not it has changed enough to be able to meet that threshold of, changing its status?
At the end of the day, CBP is going to have
That's what I thought.
yes.
Okay.
You can challenge that ruling, but it's something that's going to be difficult.
So, Alejandro, I hear you saying there's probably hits for all the individuals in the room. It's like, if you're going to buy from a tariff place, maybe you can find that same item elsewhere that's not tariff. Have you seen any of the people you're working with get a beneficial solution out of that? Like they were buying X from China and now they're buying X from, I don't know what the country, have you seen
Yes,
that happen?
we've done that a lot, and obviously we have to remember that we're coming from 2008 where there was a 25% tariff on China. And many companies reacted to that. That's why I'm sure you heard nearshoring. Companies nearshore from China back to North America. Obviously Mexico got a lot of the benefits of that because of labor cost. But right now, and we'll talk about what could happen between Mexico and Canada and the US, but if there's a 25% tariff in Mexico, well, maybe we need to consider Thailand or Vietnam. And maybe, and it could become a moving target, where if people move one place, they're going to be tariffed there. And that's what makes it very, very difficult.
Is there a source that would list what countries have tariff right now and which ones don't? And that would, like, blah, 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 US, Gov, whatever, like.
There's resources at the USTR that provide all that information. And this is where, and Brad mentioned this earlier, is it a tariff good or bad? In my view, at least, a blanket tariff on everything is bad.
Right.
There could be tariffs on certain products to protect and to grow certain industries. Okay, that's fine. But just to do a blanket tariff on everything really makes things very complicated for all of you. But yeah, there's information, and sometimes, for example, there could be where, and even with these new Chinese tariffs that were announced, there was a chapter. When I say a chapter, it's the first two digits of the HTS codes. I think it was chapter 98, which was excluded. And if you look and go into what chapter 98 is, it's like clothing that's donated to poor people. So they were not going to, but it's like that. The last item that's also very important to understand, especially when you're negotiating or signing agreements with customers or clients, is the Incoterms. Everyone's familiar with what Incoterms are, right? Essentially, the Incoterm could determine if the duty is on the seller or on the buyer. The most common one, FOB, free on board, essentially only includes packaging, and then the buyer is responsible for everything else. Logistics, transportation, insurance, duties, customs, all of it. There's the other one that's not that popular, that maybe it's going to become more popular, it's DDP. Delivered Duty Paid. Essentially, the seller is responsible for everything. So I think as we continue to see these new developments, it's going to be very important that all of you really take a quick look and understand what you're signing up for from an Incoterm perspective. I have a graph here, hopefully I can find it on the Incoterms, which is this one. And essentially, it says who's responsible for what. The darker blue is the seller and the light blue is the buyer. So for example, FOB, which is on the section below, and then DDP includes even import and duties, which is up there.
Excuse me, are you going to talk about some of the relationship between declared value and different Incoterms?
I wasn't planning to. And again, is there a particular, like?
No, well, you had mentioned DDP, so of course the 25% that happened, you know, 2008. You can, yeah, sorry, not 2008, that was a different scenario.
That was something else.
Which we don't want to go back to. As far as changing whether it's Ex Works, FOB, or bring as an importer, if we bring it in under DDP, it's under our transfer value, our declared value, versus if we drop ship it to a customer, that's then based on our selling price to the customer. Yeah.
I know there's a difference. I'm not an expert on those level of details, but would happy to, if you don't have some.
That's fair.
Yeah. So, and if you send me an email, I'll be happy to share this presentation, which has more examples on HTS codes, customs value, Incoterms, and country of origin. We'll be happy to share that with you. Katie, can you help me find, and this I do need help because it's the Trump administration tariffs. And there's like a timeline out there. So yeah, so if we can do that. So what I want to talk about next is, so what are the Trump tariffs? Obviously, when he was appointed candidate, he started to talk about tariffs. It's something that he did and he implemented during his first administration. The expectation, and what I have is a timeline on what's been announced and what's been implemented and what's potentially coming. And it starts by the inauguration. There were a lot of people, me included, that were expecting that tariffs were going to be announced during the actual inauguration address on January 20th. That was my expectation. There was a lot of people that were expecting the same thing. He did mention that he was going to create this, the Bureau of, to collect the external revenue service. So he talked about that. He talked about America First. And before I go into that, again, this is where we are from January 20th, 2025, it should be, it's not 24. Sorry about that. We have now, then we have February 1st, where the 25% tariffs on China, on Canada and Mexico were announced, 10% additional tariffs on China. The negotiations that Mexico and Canada had with the US, China tariffs take effect, and then the de minimis, which I'll go into more detail, was put on hold. And then he talked about and announced the Section 232 reinstatement of the steel and aluminum tariffs. That's going to start in March 12th. He also announced a few days ago the reciprocal tariffs. This is an investigation that's going to give him information to act by April 1st. And then this, I added this earlier today, yesterday, I don't know if you saw this, but he announced that he's planning on doing in the neighborhood of 25% tariffs on automobiles coming to the US. He's going to do an investigation and he's going to release information April 1st. As you know, in March, when I'll talk about March 3rd in a while, and then USMCA review as well. Perfect. So again, inauguration, I was expecting tariffs are announced, they're implemented immediately. He had talked about that, but that did not happen. He talked about America First, the External Revenue Service, and essentially trying to identify opportunities to target countries that were essentially were not being fair with the US. February 1st came in, and he announced and released 3 executive orders with tariffs on Mexico, Canada on 25%, with the exception of energy products from Canada, and then 10% additional tariffs on China. The trade authority, or the authority that President Trump used to establish these tariffs, was the International Emergency Economic Powers. And essentially what he did was he utilized the immigration concerns and the fentanyl concerns to release these tariffs. The day after these executive orders were signed, Canada retaliated and announced their own tariffs. Mexico decided to wait. And then both countries had conversations. It's not here. Both countries had conversations with President Trump, and just like it happened in 2019, the tariffs were postponed. Right now, the only thing we saw, and I had the Twitter post there for a month. That month comes up March 3rd. Less than 15 days from now. So I know for a fact that Mexico is negotiating with the Trump administration as we speak. I was sharing with Katie, I was at a meeting this morning downtown with the Mexican ambassador here in Chicago and the Canadian consul. They continue to have conversations, and they're really hoping that at the end of the day, these blanket tariffs of 25% are not going to be implemented.
Okay, hope is nice to have. What's the reality of the real reality and the likelihood of something being achieved?
Something being achieved, meaning they're put in place?
They're put in place, and there's something more reasonable, I guess, for lack of a better term, would be put in place instead of blanket tariffs as what's in the works now.
My perspective, your name is? Chuck.
My name is Chuck.
Chuck, my perspective is, again, I'm trying to understand President Trump, and it's difficult, but he created USMCA. If he were to put these tariffs on Mexico and Canada, it's essentially ripping that agreement completely. Again, and he called it the best agreement ever made or something like that. And at the end of the day, it's a good agreement. I think that he's using this to bring Canada and Mexico to the table to negotiate. And negotiate, yes, the immigration needs to be fixed and the fentanyl needs to be fixed, but more importantly, I think he needs to, and I was planning on talking about USMCA later, but he wants to initiate the review of USMCA sooner than 2026. So my belief is he's using this to put pressure on Mexico and Canada to come to the table and start renegotiation of USMCA. Does that mean that there's not going to be a single tariff put on Mexico and Canada? No, but I do believe that a blanket tariff from Canada and Mexico could really create havoc. Again, we just saw when I showed the graph on the deficit. Mexico is the most important trade partner for the US. Canada is the second one. Putting on a 25% tariff on everything that moves across the border, it's actually just thinking about it, it's hard to think about. We deal with a lot of automotive companies. I don't know if you are familiar with the automotive industry, but there's parts that move back and forth between Mexico, Canada, and the US 6-7 times. Imagine paying a 25% tariff every time they cross the border. Now, I know I don't have to convince you. I would need to go to Washington and try and convince other people, but again, that is my expectation. And Chuck, I cannot predict the future, and maybe we find that he imposes tariffs and then takes them away. We saw the same thing with steel and aluminum tariffs back in 2018, when it was blanket for everyone. He excluded Mexico and Canada initially, and when the negotiation of USMCA got tough, he removed the exclusion and put them into Canada and Mexico as well. And the day before the USMCA was signed, he took him out as well. Again, we saw the same thing with the previous president in Mexico. He said he was going to put a tariff, and the Mexican president agreed to send troops to the border, and he backed down. Am I saying, can I guarantee that this is going to happen? No. That is my expectation, and maybe it's not my expectation, it's my hope.
You know, I'm sure, you know, all the members here, you know, all the products that they're interested in is very diverse. We feel, you know, from our standpoint, we're in the automotive and in the steel industry making components, and kind of feel we're in the bullseye of what's being kicked around here. And so obviously we're trying to get as complete and thorough understanding as we possibly can. And right now it continues to be very hazy at best, you know, on what to expect.
No, completely. And Chuck, to be honest, I'm right there with you. Again, I don't have any inside information of what's going to happen and what's going to be announced. I'm just trying to give my perspective from all the clients I serve and the impact that this would have on businesses in all three countries. And there's a belief that tariffs affect the exporter more than the importer, and it's the opposite. Yes, the exporting country or the exporting party might be affected because the volumes might be less because of the impact of the tariff, but at the end of the day, who's paying the tariff is going to be the importer, who's usually going to transmit that tariff to the consumer. And we all lived through inflation a few years ago. This could happen. So I'm going to try and navigate to the rest of the slides. So this is the one, well, very quickly, and I don't know if this has any impact on any of you, but de minimis, essentially this was repealed for Mexico, Canada, and China as part of that February 1st executive order, which means that in the past, there were a lot of companies that could ship products from Mexico, Canada, and China to the US below $800, and they did not pay a tariff. So I'm sure many of you bought a lot of Chinese products through eBay or Amazon or something, and again, there was not a tariff on those products. He said that Mexico and Canada, again, negotiated and they put that on hold, but for China, it came through. But then a few days after, there were tons of packages at all ports and airports in the United States, and they said, we cannot handle the actual tariff implementation of this. Just let them through. So they decided to put this on hold, and I love how they used this. They said, They actually, now the Secretary of Commerce needs to notify the President when they're going to be ready to actually be able to get it implemented. So it's not even the U.S. Trade Authority that's going to decide.
So this package, low-cost package, independently of its HST code?
Independently. Again, loophole or not, for example, there was huge impact on Temu, Shima, like all those e-commerce companies. I had a conversation with a client last week. They're Australia-based and they sell clothing with SPF protection. And they essentially have a website, people buy it, it's made in China, and they send 2 t-shirts or a hat or something that's below $800 without issue right now. And they've been doing that for many, many years. And he called us like, what am I going to do now? This will be discussed, and I do think that there's going to be more to come on this. Steel and aluminum, I already talked about this a little bit. In 2018, after a Section 232 investigation, there was a tariff imposed on steel, 25%, and at the time it was 10% on aluminum. A few days ago, it was announced it's coming back on all countries, 25% for steel, and now 25, not 10%, 25% on aluminum. No exclusions. So this is going, and if you don't have the HTS, the specific HTS codes have been published, so if you need a copy, I'll be happy to send you a copy, but that's something that's available. Let me see if I found this. Well, reciprocals. This is the automobiles, and again, this is just yesterday. And I quote, tariffs will be in the neighborhood of 25%, and then similar tariff duties could be expected on semiconductors and pharmaceutical imports. They could start as soon as April 2nd, and there's more information to come. Let me see if I find. The USMCA slides, can you find? It's the last section. These 3 slides. So USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. Funny fact about USMCA, it has different names in all different countries. Obviously in the US starts with US, and Mexico is called TEMEC, Tratado México, Estados Unidos, Canada, and it's called CUSMA in Canada. Canada, US, Mexico. So USMCA replaced NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was implemented in 1994, essentially governing trade between Mexico, US, and Canada. This was an initiative that President Trump had, even as a candidate, and it centered into trying to rebalance trade between the 3 countries and also bring back the jobs that left North America for Asia. When it passed and got implemented, it had a sunset clause of 16 years, so it's going to be in place at least until 2036. And it also has a clause, and this is very relevant right now, that it's going to be reviewed every 6 years. Why is it going to be reviewed? They're trying to avoid what happened to NAFTA to happen to USMCA. Essentially, NAFTA became irrelevant because it was not updated. So they're going to try and keep USMCA relevant and updated to the changing times and the global environment. USMCA came into force on July 1st, 2020. So the negotiation or the review of, and I call it review because that's the name they use, so they're not really going to renegotiate anything, they're just going to review. It's going to happen in 2026. My expectation is going to be that the review is going to start sooner. It's not going to start until 2026. It's going to start later this year. The regional value content, which I mentioned earlier, and just to give you perspective, regional value content is the percentage of value that comes from the 3 countries.
Is it value added?
It's really your value. For example, if you're, let me use the example of a vehicle, which is was the one that had the biggest change. Under NAFTA, a vehicle needed to have 62.5% regional value content from North America, meaning that the steel, the glass, the engine, everything, at least 62.5% of the value of it needed to come from North America to be able to call the vehicle USMCA. When we move to NAFTA, when we move to USMCA, that 62.5% increased to 75%. That meant that 12.5% of the value of that vehicle that in the past could come from Japan, Korea, China, Europe, now needed to come from North America. So they wanted more value to be added locally. And that was, in general, what happened to most of the HTS codes. Most of the goods had more regional value content requirements. My expectation is that we're going to see even a higher regional value content, trying to keep other countries out, 2 more in North America. That takes me to the next one. We could also even see a specific US value content where the US could say, forget about regional. I want 30% of whatever is being considered USMCA to come from the US. I don't really care about Canada or Mexico. It needs to be from the US. I don't know how closely you follow the negotiation of USMCA, but the automotive industry had the labor value content rule, which essentially meant that for vehicles, for automobiles, 45% of the vehicle value needed to come from a high wage region, which meant salaries above $15 US. And obviously we know that that's either Canada or the US. Mexico was not part of it. So we could see something specific like that on the new or reviewed USMCA. Limitations on China. There's US has expressed concern, even the previous administration, about what China is trying to do in Mexico to serve North America. So there could be limitations put on that as well, where the US says for a product to be USMCA, it can only have, like looking at the opposite way, it can only have 5% of Chinese product. If it has more than 5, then it doesn't qualify. Or it could limit the amount of investment that Chinese companies are actually doing in Mexico. So the next point talks about the tariff that products that do not meet the rules pay. Right now, for example, if a vehicle, and sorry to only talk about cars, but that is usually the best example, and it represents the biggest chunk of trade between our 3 countries. If a vehicle does not comply with USMCA, it only pays 2.5% duty. So imagine OEMs, imagine Ford, GM, Stellantis. Are they going to invest to resource a lot of things, or can they just say, you know what, I'm going to pay 2.5% more and pay the penalty? It's a very small slap on the hand for not really complying with the rule. So what could happen is that instead of that 25%, 2.5%, it becomes 15, 10%. Then now they're going to really push companies to, you need to comply, you need to follow the rules. And then the last one, which obviously, I hope it doesn't even come close to that, but the US could decide to withdraw from USMCA and essentially start dealing without an agreement with the different tariffs on different products. Questions, comments? I hope I didn't scare you more than you were already scared. But the reality of this is, I want to come back to when I was exchanging with Chuck. I'm confident there's going to be friction initially, but we're going to end up in a good place. Is that, go ahead.
You know, my question, obviously it's very beneficial to make ourselves better informed, and that's wonderful. What's being done are political, decisions that affect trade. So how can companies that are impacted by this start to influence political decisions? How can we take action? That's what it comes down to.
Great comment, great question. Again, during the meeting I was at this morning, there were a lot of manufacturers. It was a meeting of United States Mexico Chamber of Commerce. There were a lot of companies very interested in, and they asked the same question. And what the government representatives at the meeting said is, you need to talk to your representatives. You need to make sure that they understand the impact that all these actions are going to have on your businesses, on the labor force. You might need to let people go. Again, now, are they going to listen? That's something else. I also participate with the National Association of Manufacturers, NAM. I don't know if you're familiar with NAM. They're doing their thing as well. They're having meetings, they're asking their members to share stories and share their thoughts about just the potential implication of something like this happening. And again, I'm not against tariffs. I'm against blanket tariffs. Especially blanket tariffs on a economic region, Canada, US, Mexico, that operates as such, and that will essentially just break up because of something like that. Again, in my view, if we have a strong North America, we're able to then fend off against China and other regions. But if we start breaking apart, it's going to make that much difficult. On my slide deck, there's additional strategies, much more technical on duty drawback and first sale. All those items, they're there. If you have questions, let me know. But I wanted just to keep this more of a high level and give you just my perspective on what we're seeing.
So with that said, you started to say that you're confident, based on your perspective, that this is going to end up okay. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I'm happy to. I think we're going to have a USMCA 2.0 that might have stronger requirements. I think President Trump has a lot of leverage on what that's going to be. And that's what I mean by maybe he says, forget about regional value content, it's US content. I need at least 30%. And you can only have 5% China. I think, but that's very different, Jim, that not having an agreement and having blanket tariffs. Obviously, and there's a lot in the middle that we could end up in. In my view, I'm confident that he's going to get the right advice, and the US population is going to have a lot of say, that he's going to end up maybe closer to having USMCA 2.0. Unfortunately, I cannot guarantee it.
You mean your crystal ball isn't?
It's not working right now. It's too cold. Again, that's what I had. Happy to take any additional questions, comments.
Do trade associations have the ability, to work together and try to, I say influence, but educate what the actual impact, can be?
So I know, and we actually discussed this morning, chambers do not have any lobbying ability. So they cannot lobby on behalf of its members. But I believe other trade associations can and do. I don't know, for example, as a firm, we also participate quite a bit. I don't know if you're familiar with PMA, Precision Metal Forming Association. I know they lobby a lot. They have people in Washington talking to senators, and they're pushing very hard, especially because of what's happening with steel and aluminum right now. And many of those members have operations and buy and sell in Canada and Mexico as well.
I'll bet it's a stupid question.
No.
But I don't know the answer, and I could Google it later, but I might forget, and then you probably just know, so I'll just guess. So, based on the USMCA and how it works now, is the whole idea of that everything that moves between Canada, the United States, and Mexico has no tariff?
As it stands now,
Yes.
if what you're purchasing
Yes.
or manufacturing complies with the USMCA rules, yes.
Okay.
It moves freely between the three countries without paying any tariff.
Okay.
Zero.
Okay.
Nothing.
So if that's in effect, how can then, but that agreement's.
Okay.
He apparently used that emergency order. as
Exactly.
like the
So that is on top of agreements.
Trump.
Now, we could question the fact that is it an emergency? At the end of the day, it is what it is.
But it is an executive order, so it's not,
Exactly.
it hasn't gone through legislature like a USMCA has.
I'm not an expert in legislation, Jim, but what I read is that it can be implemented and then reviewed by Congress and then they can turn it down.
The executive order? or
No,
something?
the actual tariff.
Oh, is
So-
it? Interesting.
So once he implements the tariff, Congress can review the actual action he took on those emergency powers and say, no, that's not an emergency, you have to shut it down. Now, is that going to happen with the current Congress and how, I don't know. Brad's looking at me like I took too much of your time.
No. Actually, I was thinking I do have the dumbest question. An actual dumb question. You are against blanket tariffs. What about tariffs on blankets? That was dumb and a joke all in one. You guys are real serious, right? There is such thing as a dumb question, I'm just saying, right?
If I find there's, and you want to take a, find.
I don't mean to offend any blanket manufacturers in the room.
It's not a dumb question.
There's my contact information.
It actually,
No, it's not a dumb, because that's what he wants to drain the swamp.
Yeah.
But when he gets away from blankets, you go your way, there's gonna be swamp galore. Everyone's gonna want
Who
to
needs a
accept
blanket
it.
in the swamp anyways?
I guess it wasn't dumb. It's a thinker. Well, so, thank you, Alejandro. That was insightful. And we are later going to do fireball shots until someone can name every cell on his Incoterm graph. You want to remember that one? I looked at that and I thought, thank God I'm not in college anymore. I can't remember. So, we'd also like to thank Mike. Mike from Cushman and Wakefield is here. If he could stand up and respond to today's event in Wakefield. So we'd like to bring up, Alejandro, I think a lot of people are going to want to speak to you a little later. Thank you. We appreciate your expertise. So we are going to bring up our next friend, who is indeed a friend. For a quarter century, she has been helping finance the dreams of the little business put out there. A lot of you guys she's helped out. I have a trick. There is a trick we have in local news. If you don't know a name, you say it fast and throw just a sprig of a little full pizzazz into it, and people you think you know. So this is Ursula Wegrzynowicz. Is that not it? Yeah. And this is it. So Sarah works for the SBA. You're a federal government employee, so you work for the SBA as of today. Correct. You haven't spoken with Mr. Musk.
I haven't checked my email.
Okay, yeah. So, no, she does remarkable things for remarkable businesses like you guys who are truly the wheels that keep America running. I was a kid in Michigan, you know, raised in a blue-collar family. I believe wholly in what happened in America, in Detroit, and putting America on four wheels, and therefore creating, no matter where you stand politically, the greatest civilization in the history of the world through the creation of the middle class through manufacturers. So thank you for what you do in employing people. It's not lost on us who live in this society. We appreciate you. She's the money gal. Anyone want money? Okay. Ursula, thanks for joining us. Want to take that?
Sure,
Okay.
sure, I will. Can I say, Kathy did not warn me. This is going to be live streamed, so I have a bunch of jokes I will not be using this afternoon. So this is going to be dry presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm here to really talk to you about the tools that are available to you from the Small Business Administration when it comes to volatility in the marketplace. I'm from the Office of International Trade. I'm here in Chicago. I've been, as Brad said, in this market for about 25 years working with manufacturers and distribution. I've only been with SBA for a few months. I was a small business owner. I was a trade credit insurance broker, so I worked with manufacturers who looked to use trade and political risk insurance when they did business internationally, and we'll touch on that a little bit and how that interacts with some of the SBA programs. And I also worked for Export-Import Bank, another federal government agency that really is about jobs through export. So trying to get particularly small businesses here in the United States growing and selling internationally so that you keep your employees and continue to grow. For those of you, so just a really quick introduction on the Small Business Administration in the event that some of you might not know us. We've been around for 70 years, and SBA has a few different programs. I work strictly on the capital, access to capital side. So access to capital side. SBA does do help companies contracting, so getting into federal government contracting and counseling. So some of you might have heard of the Small Business Development Centers or SCORE, which is retired executives that do a lot of assistance for companies who are startups, you know, all the way through. So this afternoon we'll talk about kind of we're going to focus in really on one of our new programs that we only launched a few months ago on working capital support, which is the first time that SBA has launched a new program in about 12 years. So it's been quite a long time just trying to get the word out. And again, we'll talk a little bit about trade credit insurance and how that might help. So as I mentioned already, the focus of today is really going to be on the capital part of what Small Business Administration does. Some of you might be familiar. I know Jimmy mentioned actually that the building here was financed with the 504 loan. So SBA does, in general, two types of loan guarantees. So first I'll step back and say that we don't do any, generally speaking, we don't do any direct lending to companies in my world. We partner with commercial banks who are the ones who are extending the loans. We're providing the guarantee so that companies who might not conventionally qualify for a loan could get access to that. I mentioned I'm in the Office of International Trade, so our focus to date has been really getting companies to do more business internationally, exporting. But this new loan program that we have provides working capital support for both domestic sales as well as export. And again, we'll go into that in a little bit of detail. And also, I welcome the opportunity to have you ask questions throughout, comments. I will reserve the right to not answer all this afternoon. So before we're going to jump into working capital program that we have, the first question I kind of wanted to address, and you all probably can answer this much better than I can. I had a service business, so I didn't have inventory. I had minimal overhead expenses. But the why in working capital is first to meet any kind of short-term obligation. So obviously payroll, paying your suppliers and so forth. But also on the positive end, sort of being ready to take on any opportunities that come your way as a result of being able to, potentially give credit, for example. So seizing on kind of market opportunities that present themselves, enhancing your competitiveness. Again, my past has always been talking to companies doing business internationally, exporting. So if you have a customer overseas who is demanding, payment terms, but that is not necessarily your standard operating procedure, maybe, again, I've worked in the Midwest. Most of the companies I've worked with always have been, some level of percent down, particularly if you're a capital equipment manufacturer, progress payments, 90% paid up, prior to shipment, and then maybe 10%, on installation or something like that, or any variance of that. Customers around the world are no different than customers in the United States. They're looking to buy on credit, much like we're looking to buy on credit, and we're no different than consumers, right? Everybody's accustomed to paying on credit terms. And so we'll talk about, kind of how SBA can support that, and then also with the use of credit insurance. So can I get a show of hands, who in the room has ever used any SBA financing or are familiar? So, like I said, up to now, SBA has done term financing for anyone who's doing real estate purchases or any kind of permanent working capital needs. And SBA has had a working capital sort of program, but the one that we released last August is definitely a huge improvement, and you'll see over the existing programs that have been in place. And the primary driver is that the fees. The fees are much more competitive than they have been in the past. Essentially, we've mirrored this program on our export program. If anyone is at all familiar with it, we're essentially charging 25 basis points fee to the lender for a 75% guarantee. And then if there's a renewal in place, it's a 27.5 basis point renewal fee, which is a heck of a lot less than the 375 basis point fee that was charged previously. And so that's the major benefit of the new program, is the fact that the fees are much lower. Working capital, so again, most of the companies I've worked in the past, family owned, I don't know if this describes you, but family, privately owned companies, maybe a little averse to taking on debt, not a bad thing. But as we're coming into this period of volatility, I guess our pitch here this afternoon is to, if you don't already have a working capital line in place, to get one in place, because as we know, and I don't think there are any lenders in the room, the best time to get access to financing is when you don't need it. Love our banker partners, but sometimes they can be a challenge to work with. So again, our role is to provide the bank comfort in extending a line of credit that maybe otherwise you wouldn't be able to get on your own. The real difference in this new working capital program, besides the fees being significantly lower, is that now we have one line of credit that can support your sales both domestically and internationally. In the past, there were two separate lines, which is just not very efficient. You'd have to have two separate lines of credit, one to manage any kind of domestic needs that you had, and one to manage any export. And what again, my focus is always working with companies on the export side. What we would find is a company would have an opportunity to sell a $500,000 piece of capital equipment to a customer in Chile, for example, and maybe the progress payments are 50% down. Chilean buyer says, okay, I'll give you 50% down, but I want you to give me a standby letter of credit or some sort of performance bond. In return, you go to your bank, you say, I need to put up this performance bond. The bank says, okay, I'll take your cash, or I'm going to draw against dollar for dollar against your line of credit. So if the purpose of taking that down payment was at all to fund your own working capital needs, that's now all being used to support that standby letter of credit. Of course, from the buyer's perspective, if they don't know you, they're asking you for that standby letter of credit because they want to be confident that in 6 months' time they're going to get that equipment that they ordered, or they're going to get their money back. But again, for most companies, it is in part, funding working capital. And so having a line in place, one of the benefits of this is that we only require 25% collateralization of that standby letter of credit. So there's just a lot more flexibilities. So the other thing that we see too is that if we can provide you with access to financing for both domestic and international, we're hoping that even if you're using it all domestically, that you'll be more likely to bid on international opportunities. opportunities, on those export opportunities, knowing that you have financing in place already, because it doesn't matter if one year the line is used for 100% domestic sales and next year it's 80% domestic, 20% export, or back and forth between the two. So there's two different ways that we can set up with your commercial bank this type of working capital financing. One is sort of, I would say, backward looking. So looking at your assets, your existing assets. So we take a look at what are your trading assets, your accounts receivable, your inventory, and essentially with our guarantee, and I've got a slide up here that'll show you that with SBA's guarantee, essentially the bank can give you better advance rates and you can access more of that inventory, more of that existing accounts receivable than you would be able to do without us. Of course, it does require you to go through a normal due diligence process with the bank as if we weren't even involved in the transaction at all. For SBA, the eligibility requirements are typically, of course, that the company be located here in the United States, have U.S. ownership or permanent resident ownership, and be a small business. So for manufacturers, that's 500 employees or less. We do look at total ownership, and we also do require anybody in the business with 20% or more ownership stake to provide a personal guarantee. So actually, I'm going to skip right over to the next slide that actually shows the percentages. So in the first example, in the yellow, you'll see what typically a bank would advance to a company on accounts receivable and on inventory. And in the green, we're highlighting with SBA guarantee. With our guarantee, a bank could actually advance up to 60% on inventory. In this example, we set it at 50. It's at the bank's discretion to set potentially a lower amount. But the other advantage is on the accounts receivable. So we broke it out into different types. So uninsured domestic accounts receivable, with our guarantee, you get a 5% boost. So typically banks will advance 80% on AR. With us guaranteeing, we can bump it up, and they can bump it up to an additional 5%. But if your company was to use actually credit insurance domestic, you could get an additional 5%. And then if you're doing business internationally and you're extending terms, you're not insuring those receivables, we can allow some of those receivables to support the line, but on $1 million line, only $150,000 of uninsured for an AR could support that line. So we limit it to only 15% of the line because we really prefer that if you're selling on open account terms that you are indeed using credit insurance to protect yourselves. Because the bottom line is that SBA, these guarantees, you as businesses are beneficiaries of the guarantee because you're hopefully getting access to a line of credit that otherwise you may not have gotten. But really, we're protecting the bank. We're not protecting you. You're the beneficiary of that line of credit again. And so the reason we emphasize use of credit insurance is we want you to be protected, because this should be self-liquidating. If you have insurance on your receivables and something goes awry, you file a claim on your insurance, and that'll keep you able to pay down a line of credit. If you don't have insurance and something goes awry, then the SBA has to turn to you, which is like the last thing we ever wanted to do, because we wanted to see you have access to capital so you could grow your businesses and employ more people and sell more and grow out of the SBA eventually. So huge emphasis. I'm really happy to see what our office that essentially designed this program is led by a former First American banker. He's been with SBA just 3 years now. Comes from the area here with First American. He's the one who jointly with some SBA staff designed this new program, and again emphasized the use of credit insurance, because again we saw in the past too many companies, too many banks going in and maybe extending lines of credit and not talking to you about how do you mitigate your risk when you do business internationally and certainly domestically as well. But the major risk here would be some international. Any questions? So just a quick example, I mean, some of the things that we've seen post-COVID, and we'll see, kind of what happens in the next year or so, is that companies have moved from and you tell me, we've seen our customers move from a kind of a just-in-time to a just-in-case So inventory levels are increasing to make sure that, you know, if there's disruptions in the supply chain, that you're not, you know, scrambling at the last minute trying to get access to whatever materials that you need. And it's exactly, this is a company down in South Florida that we work with that distributes medical devices and manufactures and distributes medical devices. And so they got a line of credit in place just to be able to purchase more, to have more surgical stainless steel on hand, so that there was potentially less disruption in their manufacturing process. And again, we looked at their existing AR and their existing inventory to be able to support that and essentially, quote unquote, juice a little bit more of what they already had. One thing I'll say is that, so typically, when we're talking about export transactions, those are goods that are made here, shipped from the United States. We don't have a content requirement, so maybe there's inputs that are imported from various countries, but final manufacturers here and exported from here. That's, to us, an export, but also if you have product made in China and direct shipped to a customer in Mexico, at least that AR, we couldn't advance against the inventory because it's not here, but the AR that's generated as a result of that sale, you had it made in China, but it's direct shipped to Mexico, that AR at least is additional collateral that can be utilized by us, or by your lender, I should say, with our guarantee. So the other way that we can set up this working capital line of credit is sort of, I would say, forward-looking. So this is particularly used, I would say, by contractors and also by capital equipment manufacturers have long lead times. So it's essentially kind of like purchase order financing. So you score a large contract, you don't necessarily have the available inventory and accounts receivable. So even with our guarantee, maybe there's not enough to be able to fund the needs that you have with a particular contract. What we can do is set up, based on either a single contract or multiple contract, a line of credit that is essentially allowing your bank to advance up to 85% of the contract amount, or 100% of your cost, whichever is less. So essentially you can be able to, you know, potentially borrow everything that you need, of course not your profit margin, in order to be able to manufacture the goods, take time, you know, however much time that takes, and then invoice the customer and get paid 60 days later. And again, it doesn't matter if this is a domestic or an export transaction. The bank would set up, you know, a lockbox or cash account, essentially goes by different names, but essentially when you've invoiced the customer, they will collect the payment, pay down the line, and, you know, remit to you essentially your profit. So this is one way, you know, to kind of help companies who are in growth mode, who might have, you know, opportunities, if you have opportunities that you might otherwise walk away from. Hopefully with our support, it's something that can be done. You know, we talk to lenders all the time, so from their perspective, we talk to them about the fact that they can lend earlier to you, but again, from your perspective, it's really getting access to capital that you otherwise may not have been able to without our support. This is kind of a graphic here. And then two examples again. In the first scenario, the direct costs are $600,000, and basically on $1 million contract, the company can borrow 100%. So their full $600,000 in costs. In the second scenario, their costs exceed the max that we allow, 85% of the contract amount. So either way, but the lesser of either 85% of the purchase amount or 100% of the cost. So we actually have a local example. We'll skip this one because one of the local ones that we have, companies, it's a masonry company here in Illinois that is a subcontractor on doing the masonry work for Ryan Field up in Evanston, the new stadium that's going up. So they have to be able to provide the general contractor, you know, assurances that they're going to be able to do all the masonry work, and then bill sort of after the fact. And so they set up this this sort of working capital financing transaction based on that contract that they received. So we're really excited to see what that will look like I'm not sure if that next year that it's going to be completed or not. Brad was asking me what the interest rates are. We are not the ones that determine. We certainly charge a fee to the bank, which no doubt will be passed on to you in terms of us providing that 75% guarantee. But we do have some max that the bank can change. And up to now, the financing terms have always been based on prime. A lot of banks have moved to, some banks, I would say larger regional banks and national banks have moved to using SOFR, which is a secured overnight funding rate, kind of a replacement for LIBOR. So we just give banks the flexibility to determine, are they going to charge based on prime, are they going to charge based on SOFR? And at SOFR plus 3, SOFR is a lot lower rate than prime. So the plus 3 applies to SOFR, does not apply to prime. So hopefully that's clear. And again, our guarantee, I would say it's 75% because typically we see this as kind of a starter asset-based line. So most of the deals that we've closed thus far have been over $500,000. There are a few that below. Ultimately, it's the bank's decision. There are monitoring requirements the bank has. So that's why we see sort of $500,000 and above is making sense given the monitoring that they're required to do. And also SBA does have other loan programs. One is just called Express. One is Export Express that go up to $500,000 that are not monitored and have a lot more flexibility. So even though this can be any dollar amount, we see sort of $500,000 and greater being the floor. And again, up to $5 million is just what we can do currently. That hasn't been updated in, again, a dozen years, and hopefully Congress will lift that. But it is literally an act of Congress to lift our lending cap, so we'll see. I mentioned already with the fees are 25 basis points on the first year, and then 27.5 basis points for every year after on renewals. Up to $1 million, we're not charging any fees for this current fiscal year. So that goes through September 30. We'll see. That was the case last year as well. Don't know if that'll be renewed next year or not. And again, we kind of ran through this. You know, again, why am I talking to you about working capital here today when we're talking about trade and tariffs? I mean, I guess the underlying message is if you don't have a line of credit in place, to look to potentially put one in place, because one of the ways to, you know, potentially deal with customers if you're exporting and your prices go up is, you know, if you're not currently offering terms to those customers, is there, you know, negotiation that you have some leverage with your customer if you can start to give them, you know, net 90-day, you know, open account terms, and then again ensuring that receivable.
I have a question.
Yes.
I mean,
sorry.
as we talk about, and I don't mean to hit on this like it's a joke, but the shrinking of the government industrial complex, right? Potentially your job, like and then you talk about in concert with tariffs, and you know it's the same administration doing all these things. Like how do you tell a group of business owners we're going to do this? I might not be here tomorrow, and we don't. Do you understand?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I'm just looking at the live stream. So, I mean, I worked for Exxon Bank.
And also, complete props to you for showing up here tonight, speaking to us with this amount of candor. So, I really appreciate it.
There's no need for that because
you're government employee.
Well, but I do love my job,
yeah.
so.
I can tell you're talking at that speed. I'm like, did you wake up 2 hours ago and just get coffee?
Sorry,
Yeah,
I have a tendency of talking fast. So, I mean, thanks for putting me on the spot. I mean, a lot of these programs, whether it's credit insurance being offered by Exxon Bank or these loan programs have been in existence, you know, for decades. I mean, the working capital program is new. It got launched last year, but it's I don't know that it's a political animal. It's us responding to market needs. There should have been a working capital program that supported both domestic and exports under one line of credit. I mean, to have a company separately set up 2 lines of credit is impossible. So I mentioned, you know, I would work with companies. At XM, we had the same thing. We had only an export working capital program. Previously, SBA, you know, bifurcated the 2. And when you talk to a company who has an international opportunity and they bank with ABC Bank for their domestic needs, and you say to them, okay, well, the government can provide a guarantee so that, you know, that you can do that export, you can reduce your collateral requirement so that you can issue that standby and make your customer happy. But you'd go to ABC Bank and they're like, well, we don't work with SBA or XM Bank. Okay, all right, well, let's have you talk to somebody who does. So then you run over to somebody who does, and that somebody says, well, I'm not gonna just do this line of credit. I want the entirety of the relationship, right? I mean, you know that better than I do. So are you gonna move the entire relationship for an opportunity to bid on an export contract? I mean, probably not. And so what I would see is either companies, you know, negotiate different terms, you know, in some cases walk away. So the fact that our team, you know, put this in place, and again, we're led by a former First American Bank banker who worked in this market and said, this is crazy. Why don't we have a line of credit that supports both under one? So I don't know if that answers your question, Brad, but that's my answer, is that we've been here and we should be evolving. I mean, things could probably evolve faster, but.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
So, anyone familiar with credit insurance? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to look at the renewal rates with the 27.5 basis points. When you get connected and you say you get your first year, are you locked into those 27.5 basis points for future years, regardless of what other noise happens, would you say? Or?
So you don't have to set up the line for multiple years. It could be set up for 1 year, and if you choose to renew, the fee is charged by the bank to you. But depending on, you know, what your needs are, you may choose, you know, not to renew or change the line amount, increase, decrease, again,
I was
depending
thinking,
on
like
what
you said that it had gone from, what, 375 to...
Right. We have a different program. It's called Capline. It's essentially a working capital program, and it's incredibly expensive. It's barely used. This program has been in place for 6 months, and we've booked $60 million in loans. We've already surpassed that domestic. It just shows that that program's just going to go away because it didn't serve the market.
Okay, so it's obviously attractive.
Right.
And it's a case of,
right.
Will it be sustainable beyond just a year if I choose to renew?
So it is a pilot. So right now, the way anything starts in government is it's got to be a pilot first. So it's in place till July of 2027. To your point, though, we have some banks, regional banks, who are saying, so we've got 31 banks signed up local or across the United States who have signed up to be preferred lenders, where they can put these applications in without sending it through us. Now, right now, any applications that come through us, because it's a new program, the turnaround time is a couple, 3 days a week, because it's a new program. The volume isn't, high yet. In fact, we had one banker called and said, I got an approval in like 2 or 3 days, and he was like complaining. I was like, are you serious? Like, you're complaining? And he was like, well, there must be something wrong. You must have skipped something. And I was like, you have our guarantee. Go away. Like, what are we talking about here? But we'll see. Right now, besides First American, UC Bank, I know Wintrust is in process. I'm just trying to think of the local banks who have signed on already. I have to say the response from the lending community has been very positive, because they just see it as an additional tool to be able to extend term, or capital financing to some companies that they're, again, in the past maybe they couldn't quite get there. So I was just going to ask if anyone's familiar with trade credit insurance or export credit insurance or accounts receivable insurance. It goes by a zillion different names. Anyone using it? Okay. Do you use private or public? Private, okay. This That's great to hear. So trade credit insurance is, for those of you who might not be familiar, is really, if you look at your own balance sheet as a business owner, most of the items on your balance sheet are going to be insured, except typically accounts receivable. And for a lot of companies, that ends up being, a significant part of their balance sheet. And so really credit insurance is just that. It's insurance on your accounts receivable. And there's carriers that provide accounts receivable insurance for domestic accounts receivable, for foreign, for both. As far as carriers are concerned, and really what does it do? It protects you against non-payment, and it gives you the ability to hopefully give longer payment terms than maybe you would do on your own. And the other thing is, if you are giving terms to customers, are you underwriting them internally for a large enough amount that they truly qualify for? So we always say, particularly small businesses, if you're doing business domestically or internationally, you want to look like a global player, and you want to have the ability to, assess whether or not a customer is creditworthy under the transaction. And if they're deserving of credit, then, why not consider that, particularly from a sales standpoint, particularly if, prices go up or you have to make changes and the market gets, more difficult to do business in. What are the levers that you have to continue to keep your customers happy? And to win additional business. And giving terms is certainly one way. And the other sort of benefit of accounts receivable insurance is what I showed you, that slide, is that if you have insurance on that receivable, that then becomes a collateral that you can use, particularly on the foreign side. Because domestic, the bankers can wrap their heads around that, but on the foreign, they certainly can. What's covered? Slow pay, bankruptcy. Political risks are covered as well. I will say, as a former broker, I was a broker for 15 years. When I filed claims, it was for commercial reasons. It is not. I didn't have the experience of filing a political. I did bold what's not covered, disputes. I don't know if Jean, if that's what got your attention on the slide. It's like the white elephant in the room. Are there ways, the question from a company is, okay, I'm going to buy this insurance, and what if my customer says they're unhappy with the product and they're not going to pay for it, and that's a dispute, and that gives the insurance company reason not to pay? Well, there are best practices that you can put in place. On an export, again, I always default to export because that's kind of my comfort zone, but certainly domestic as well. If you're invoicing your customer, if you're controlling the movement of the freight, Alejandro mentioned Incoterms. I'm a huge fan of controlling your destiny, and that means moving the freight overseas, because typically moving the freight, whether you're getting paid on a letter of credit or if you're using insurance, control of documents means control of payment. And so if you have given a customer in Mexico, for example, 60-day open account terms, and you control the movement of the freight, and you've invoiced them, and you have visibility into when the goods arrive, and the terms are net 90, and the goods arrived in 45 days, and you haven't heard from the customer, and day net 90 comes, and day 120 comes, and you're not hearing from the customer, and you're not getting payment, and all of a sudden there's a problem with the product, well, I mean, that's a red flag right there for the insurer, right? There are ways, there are best practices to put in place to deal with disputes. I have to say, the only time I had a dispute was a U.S. company in Wisconsin that didn't live up to their warranty, that was denied a claim. They didn't live up to their warranty, so the insurance company sided with the buyer. But other than that, in my 15 years of filing claims, disputes weren't an issue. There were other issues as far as claim payments were concerned, don't get me wrong, but not disputes. In terms of who provides accounts receivable insurance, there's a whole slew, 30+ carriers on the private side that provide accounts receivable insurance. The big ones, Allianz, formerly Euler, Coface, and Atradius are ones that have their own sales agents that you can go to direct. All the others must be accessed through a broker. Ex-Im Bank is the U.S. federal government agency that essentially acts as an insurance carrier. They only do it for export. With them, you can access direct or through a broker. My recommendation as a former broker is to, of course, go through a broker, because if you're not, you're accessing 4 carriers at the max. You're missing out on 25+ carriers. A good broker should be working for you and shopping the market for you. And how that interacts, again, you saw the slide earlier with SBA, is that if you have insurance on your receivables, particularly on the foreign, then that gives you more availability on a line of credit, more on your collateral, I should say. That's all, folks, for me. Questions?
Yeah. Could you go over everything you said? That was remarkable speed. Holy cow. We're going to talk about government efficiency. You are like the poster child.
I'm giving the mic back.
You're remarkable. Ursula, thank you. Everybody, thank you. Thank you. Over here. So they're going to be here to answer a couple questions later. Again, we're going to have the fireball shot thing to remember every cell on his Incoterm. Was that what it was called?
Yes.
I don't even know what that was. That's maybe why I was falling asleep during micro or macroeconomics at Michigan State. Thank you for doing this. Mike from Cushman Wakefield, thank you very much for sponsoring this. We appreciate it. I hope you guys had a little bit of a learn. Does anyone have any, okay, this is what I like to do. It's like a hostage situation. I like to pick out one person in the room because everyone here certainly has a question. Blue guy, glasses, no. So I want to know, tell me a little bit about your business. Tell me a little bit about what brought you here today, what your concerns are, and what question you would have for one of our experts. Can we do that? Yes, of course we can. I will be hostage.
Brian with HFI Manufacturing. We're a contract manufacturer for restaurant, medical, other metal equipment here in St. Charles, Illinois. We've been in business 60 years, and I also have another entity with a company called Fusion Dynamics, which does the same thing with also PCB boards down in Mexico. So,
oh wow.
My questions are a little bit off topic, not so much with tariffs, but I was going to talk to the gentleman about free trade zones, a little bit more in specific.
Does anyone else want to know about free trade zones? I mean, it must be of interest. So, I mean, you're straddling both sides of the border. Correct. So can you think of one question that would hit hardest for this room here? Besides the crystal ball question.
No, I mean, I think that the crystal ball is exactly where we're at. We're still in limbo land from the extension of February. I still think, much like the speaker, that I think that this is a bargaining chip to see where we stand with Canada. I don't think much is going to happen. I disagree with them on the fact that I don't think much is going to happen until the new Prime Minister up in Canada actually comes into play. And then I think changes will occur with Canada and Mexico. But that's about it.
So do we want to fight that out? No, just kidding.
With
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Here, maybe.
No, but so that is a really interesting question, and I think thank you for that. And I think one thing, Alejandro, like let's reapproach this because I mean we're dealing with skeptics and pessimists. I used to be a news guy, was a pessimist. Chuck, I think you talked about hope as if it's not a real thing. Come on, hope. You can't go to your board of directors and say we've got a year of projections based on hope. You know, no, you can't do that.
So we got a plan.
Yeah, so, I mean, we can say reach out to your representatives and you need to buy them, right? I mean, come on, we're in the what can they do? What can they tell their employees to do? I mean, because there is something as a collective group here. You guys are all in your different silos. But as a group with all those that you employ, your voice is magnified. You, not. 50 of you and all your employees, yes. Same region, yes. Same state rep, same this, same that, county board, boom, 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 boom. Like, and you know, because you're all over the place. You're in Michigan, you're in Illinois, you're in Monterrey, Mexico. You also hit a bunch of other places within the United States. Like at the granular issue, because that's where this is going to get solved. When you get down, you get into weeds. What is the one thing you tell them to do?
So I'm going to start by saying what you should not do is nothing. So you need to act. And for example, if I were to say tomorrow there's going to be a 25% tariff on Mexican goods. Do you know the economic impact that you're going to have? Do you have that number? For example, going back to what I said about HTS codes, do you know where you're buying from? The country of origin of all those goods? Is there any low-hanging fruit there already that you could say, again, these 5-10 products, I might find someone here locally that I can source from? We start doing something so if it happens, which again we'll see, it doesn't catch you with your pants down. Like, know what you at least need to start worrying about or acting on immediately as soon as that hits. Is that moving or finding suppliers instead of Mexico to Thailand or from China to other places, or it's these 4 part numbers that are going to give me the biggest issue I need to be worried about? Can I talk to that vendor and see if they can manufacture somewhere else? Like, you can start doing something. And I think some of the wake-up calls that we've seen for our clients is, in the past, we were very comfortable because we didn't really need to ensure that our VOMs were accurate or that we had the HTS codes correctly or that we knew the country of origin, because it didn't really matter. But I think it's going to help your business regardless if you're manufacturing. It's going to help your business to really have a much better operation. A lot more information, much more organized. And in case that hits, you're going to be able to let me go after these 4 products first, or these 4 components, or these 5 raw materials, to try and fix the issue first. So just don't wait and see if it's going to happen. Is that good?
That's great. That's absolutely great. And actually, breaking news, Donald Trump just signed an executive order where you can now once again say, don't let them catch you with your pants down. You're fine. There was a couple years ago say that. But no, just kidding. So, yeah, that is true. Doing nothing is unacceptable. Like we think in the communications business, being anonymous is now unacceptable. If you are not doing something to be seen, you're losing. You're losing already. If in the scroll economy, people aren't scrolling, if we're all scrolling, if they're not stopping to see what you have to say, unacceptable. Thank you for making this happen. Alejandro, we appreciate it. He's got a quick flight. I'm sure it's a quick flight to Monterey, right, in the morning. And Ursula, we appreciate you as well. Thank you so much. And one more thank you to Mike. Come on up, Mike. Speak for 15 minutes to see. No, just kidding. Just kidding. No, you only have a minute anyway.
I got my daughter.
Okay, from Cushman and Wakefield, putting this on Mike.
Here's actually what we've seen beforehand. About over the last 18 to 24 months on industrial real estate. In New Jersey, we've seen about 20 million square feet being leased by third-party Chinese logistics companies. Here in Chicago, about 2 to 3 million square feet. And then out in California, about 40 million square feet. So they already have taken the preemptive over the last 18 to 24 months, and we don't think that's going to be a shortage of not just Chinese companies, but other companies setting home here. There's other requirements out there that they're trying to set, a plant here to try to outstrip the tariffs. So that was an interesting thing that we've been tracking for the last almost 24 months. But thank you, everyone. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. So you got to say hi and bye.
Thanks, Mike. We're taking out real estate. And on that note, off to volleyball's daughter's volleyball game. Mike, thank you. Thank you for putting this on. So, I mean, that was
Dance.
okay. Critical information there, right? About who's buying what. So, thank you guys for being here. Critically important, and most of all, to Kathy Gilmore. Thank you for putting this on. So, bring this up for some final thoughts.
I just want to thank Jimmy Allen for hosting us today, and Brad, thank you so much for your comments and for your kind of facilitating of the discussion. And what a wonderful discussion, and Ursula, we're really looking forward to the jokes at the bar after. So, but thank you guys, everybody, for coming today, and we've got a full calendar. I know Jessica will want me to remind you that the AI conference is on Friday, so we do still have a few seats left, not many. And just keep watching. Spark Awards, March 12th. So many things on the calendar, so we hope to see you guys again soon. So I think Jimmy's gonna let us stay for a little bit longer. Is that true? Okay, all right, so head on over, grab a drink, grab some snacks, and stay for a few more minutes if you can. All right, thanks guys.